The air was thick with tension. The crowds were silent, their eyes fixed on the platform where she stood. Alara felt the weight of their gaze, the expectation and dread hanging in the air like a tangible force. She stood tall, her head held high, despite the shackles on her wrists and the cold metal collar around her neck. This was supposed to be the end, her end. Yet, she couldn't help but feel an odd sense of defiance, as though her spirit, her refusal to bend, would live on even in the face of death. She had been the symbol of resistance for years now, a figurehead of a rebellion that had no face. The humans had been scattered, divided, driven underground by the alien forces that now controlled every aspect of life on Earth. Every movement, every whisper of dissent had been crushed. Yet, Alara had stood firm, never willing to surrender, never willing to let the invaders think they had broken the spirit of humanity. Now, as the giant guillotine loomed overhead, poised to fall, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't afraid of dying. No, she had accepted that fate long ago. What she couldn't accept was the idea that the aliens, the invaders who had come to Earth with their superior technology and ruthless military might, would erase the legacy of her people. That they would erase her. The alien general, Ragnor, stood at the back of the crowd, his tall, imposing form like a shadow cast over the scene. His cold eyes were fixed on her, watching her every move. Alara could feel his gaze even from across the space, as if it were burning into her. He was a symbol of everything the humans hated, a reminder of the alien conquest that had torn their world apart. His race had come from a distant star, with weapons far beyond anything humanity could have hoped to counter. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity had fought back, however small their victories might have been. Ragnor was known for his ruthlessness. He had led countless campaigns to subjugate entire civilizations, bringing them to their knees without hesitation. He was a general, an instrument of war. He didn't care about the lives of those he conquered. To him, humans were just another species to be dealt with, just another obstacle to remove in the pursuit of his race's dominance. And today, he would witness the public execution of one of the few humans left who dared to fight back. Alara could see the guillotine's blade above her, suspended and gleaming in the dim light. The mechanism was slow and deliberate, a cruel reminder of the alien oppressor's power. It would fall, and with it, her life would end. But even in that moment, Alara felt an inexplicable surge of defiance. She wouldn't let them break her. She wouldn't let them take away her pride. The crowd shifted slightly as the signal was given. She was to be executed in front of them all, an example. The silence grew deeper, more oppressive. A collective breath was held, and Alara's chest tightened, but not from fear. It was a strange calmness that washed over her as she met the eyes of the alien soldiers surrounding her. Their weapons trained on her, their expressions unreadable. She didn't need to look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the distant horizon, on the fading light of a world she had fought so hard to protect. Her world, Earth, the Earth that had been stolen from her, the Earth that would remain her home, no matter what these invaders did to it. Alara's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of metal shifting above her. The guillotine's mechanism was being prepared. The anticipation of the crowd was palpable. She could almost hear their breaths, their collective waiting. And then, the world seemed to hold still as the lever was pulled. The blade began its fall. It was slow, deliberate, and yet it felt like the entire world had frozen in that moment. Time stretched, and she could hear nothing but the roaring in her ears, the pounding of her heart. She did not close her eyes. She was not afraid. This was how it would end. But then something strange happened. The blade halted. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion. Alara's heart skipped a beat as the guillotine, inches from her neck, came to a sudden screeching stop. The air grew thick with a strange energy, a tension that didn't make sense. Alara tried to move, tried to speak, but her voice faltered. What was happening? A figure emerged from the crowd, stepping forward with slow, measured steps. The figure was tall, commanding. Alara's eyes widened as she recognized him. Ragnor, the alien general, the one who had ordered her capture, the one who had witnessed her resistance from afar. He was the one who had stopped the guillotine. His sharp features were stoic as he moved forward, his eyes locking onto hers. There was something unreadable in his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that unsettled her in ways she couldn't understand. Alara's breath caught in her throat as he stopped just a few feet in front of her. "Why?" she demanded, her voice hoarse but strong. "Why did you stop it?" Ragnar's lips barely twitched, the faintest hint of something resembling emotion passing across his face. He was a creature of control, a being built for war, not for compassion or mercy. Yet, here he was, standing before her, defying the very purpose he had been created for. "You should be dead," he said, his voice low and commanding, but there was no anger, no malice in it, just an odd flatness. "You are a symbol of defiance. You should have been executed as an example to your people. But I couldn't allow it." Alara's heart raced. She couldn't understand him. She couldn't understand why, of all people, he was the one to stop her death. She had heard the stories of the ruthless alien generals, the way they crushed any hint of rebellion without mercy. So why was Ragnor standing in front of her, saving her from a fate that seemed so certain? Her mind raced. Could it be that there was something more? Something beneath the cold, unfeeling exterior of this alien who had watched humanity crumble under his species' heel? Could he truly have seen something in her that had made him hesitate? Could he have seen her not as an enemy, but as a person? Her thoughts were interrupted as he stepped closer, the sound of his boots on the stone platform echoing in her ears. Alara stood still, the shock of the moment fading into a sense of confusion. She didn't know what to do. This wasn't part of the plan. She had expected to die here, in front of this alien's cold, unblinking eyes. "You are not dead," Ragnor spoke again, his voice tinged with something Alara couldn't quite place. "And I am not your enemy." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The last words she ever expected to hear from an alien general were those. She had fought for so long, suffered so much, and yet here he was, speaking to her in such strange terms. Could it be a trick? Could it be part of a plan to break her, to turn her to their side? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that this moment, this strange twist in fate, had changed everything, and she couldn't yet understand what it meant. Alara's world was a blur as she was led away from the execution platform, the restraints still tight around her wrists. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't begin to answer. Why had Ragnor stopped the guillotine? What did it mean that he was standing in front of her now, his tall form towering like a shadow, yet somehow different than the emotionless monster she had imagined him to be? Her heart still raced, though she no longer feared the blade. In a strange way, her fear had turned into confusion. She had been so certain that death was the only way out. But now everything was different. They walked down cold, metallic hallways, the clanking of their boots against the hard floors echoing in the silence. The alien soldiers that had been watching her in the courtyard followed, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Their alien faces were blank, emotionless, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Alara's mind. Finally, they arrived at a door that slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was stark, clinical, a sterile, white space that reminded her of nothing so much as a prison. It was a small room with a single cot against one wall, a low table, and a few metal chairs. The air was cool, the faint hum of machinery filling the space with an unsettling quiet. Ragnor motioned for her to enter, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't speak, but his gaze was heavy, pressing down on her with an unspoken command. Reluctantly, Alara stepped inside. The door slid shut behind her, and she turned to face him, her throat dry. "I don't understand," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why did you stop it? Why didn't you just let them kill me? You should want me dead. I'm a symbol of everything your kind hates." Ragnor stood in the doorway, his posture straight and rigid. But there was something in the way he held himself that was different from the detached, emotionless beings she had seen before. His shoulders were tense, but not from anger. It was as if he was fighting some internal battle, something he wasn't ready to share. "You are not just a symbol," he replied after a long pause. His voice was low, the usual coldness replaced with something softer. "You are a person, and I've seen what you stand for. Your people are resilient, yes, but you're more than just rebels. You're fighting for your home, for your lives. That matters." Alara blinked, taken aback by the words. You think that matters?" She laughed bitterly, the sound rough and filled with disbelief. "You're an alien. You came to Earth with your armies and took everything from us. You destroyed everything we had. And you're telling me that my life matters to you?" Ragnor didn't respond immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly as he stepped into the room, moving closer to her. There was no anger in his movements, just an unsettling stillness that made her heart race once more. He stopped just a few feet away, too close for comfort, but Alara didn't move. "I didn't want to destroy your world," he said quietly. "I didn't choose this. My people, my species. We were told to invade, to conquer. We did not ask for this war. But I've come to realize that this isn't as simple as the orders we've been given." Alara frowned, her mind struggling to make sense of what he was saying. It didn't make sense. Couldn't. How could a general, a leader of the alien forces, speak of resistance and regret? He was the enemy. He had to be. "Why are you telling me this?" she demanded, stepping back as if the words alone could keep him at bay. "You think that just because you saved my life for some unknown reason that I'll trust you? You think I'll forget who you are? What you've done?" Ragnar's eyes flickered with something she could barely identify. Was it regret? She had no idea. He didn't seem like the type to express such emotions, and yet, there it was. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he replied, his voice soft, almost as if he were talking to himself. "I'm asking you to understand that I don't agree with everything my people have done. I don't agree with the way we've treated your kind, and I don't believe this war is the right path." Alara stared at him, disbelief painted across her face. This wasn't happening. She must have heard wrong. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "That you've suddenly had a change of heart? That you, an alien general, are somehow not complicit in the destruction of humanity?" Ragnor didn't look away. "I don't have all the answers, Alara. I can't change everything, but I can change what I can control. And right now, that's you." The words hit her like a slap. She shook her head in confusion, stepping back again, as if the distance between them would somehow make this all make sense. "No, you can't mean that. You can't possibly." "I do," he interrupted, his voice firm this time. "I've been watching you and your people. The way you fight for a cause that you know you can't win. The way you never give up, no matter how much you lose. It's admirable. And in a way, it's made me question everything." Alara's mind spun. Each word he spoke like a stone cast into the calm waters of her beliefs. She had always known her enemies to be ruthless, uncaring, monsters in the most literal sense. And here, in front of her, was a man, an alien who had been part of that destruction, but now, somehow, was questioning everything. She didn't know whether to be angry or confused. "This doesn't change anything," she said, her voice low, though her heart hammered in her chest. "You're still the enemy. You're still the one who brought this war to my people." Ragnor didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I will do what I can to make things right. Starting with you." Alara swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She wanted to shout at him, to call him every name she could think of, to remind him of everything his kind had taken from her. But there was something about his gaze, something about the sincerity in his voice that made her pause. He didn't seem like the monster she had believed him to be. She wasn't sure what he was, but he was something different, and that, in itself, was more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. "And what do you expect from me?" she asked, the words sharp, but laced with a thread of uncertainty. Ragnor hesitated, his eyes softening just slightly. "I don't know, but we will find out together." The silence between them stretched out, each of them caught in a moment neither could fully understand. Neither of them could predict what came next, but for the first time since the war had started, there was a flicker of hope, of something neither could yet name. Alara spent the next few days in a strange, tense quiet. She hadn't seen Ragnor again after their first conversation in the small, sterile room. His absence was both a relief and a source of anxiety. On one hand, she didn't want to face him again. Not yet. Not while her mind was still racing with all the impossible things he had said. On the other hand, something inside her couldn't deny the curiosity that gnawed at her. Why had he stopped her execution? Why did he say he wanted to make things right? The answers seemed out of reach, and yet she found herself wondering whether there was more to him than the alien general who had come to Earth to destroy her world. The room she was held in was small and suffocating, but it gave her the space to think. She had come to the conclusion that whatever Ragnar's motives were, they didn't matter. He was an alien, an invader, and everything he had done had been part of a larger plan to dominate Earth. Nothing he said could undo the pain and loss she had already endured. She had seen her friends fall in battle, her family driven into hiding, and the Earth itself torn apart under the alien rule. She couldn't forgive him, not yet, not after everything. And yet, a part of her wondered if he might be telling the truth. That thought frightened her more than anything. Ragnor finally returned to the room late one evening, the low hum of the door sliding open rousing her from a restless sleep. She hadn't been able to shut her eyes properly in days, the stress of captivity and the uncertainty of her fate keeping her awake. Her body ached, and her thoughts were tangled. As he entered, his presence filled the space, tall and imposing as ever, but something in his expression was different. There was no anger, no coldness. It was almost like a vulnerability. "I know you're confused," Ragnor said, his voice quiet but firm. "I can't undo the past. I know that, but I want to make sure you understand what I'm offering." Alara sat up, her mind still foggy from her thoughts and the lack of rest. "What is it you're offering?" she asked, her tone biting but laced with weariness. She couldn't help the edge in her voice. Everything about this situation made her feel like she was on the verge of a precipice, teetering between anger and something else she couldn't quite place. Ragnor walked closer, the sound of his boots echoing softly in the room. "I'm offering you a choice," he said, stopping just a few feet away from her. "I won't pretend to know what it's like to be human, or to understand everything your people have gone through, but I've seen what you're capable of. Your resistance, your strength. And I believe there's more to this war than what we've been told." Alara narrowed her eyes, studying him. His words felt genuine, but they still didn't make sense. He was a high-ranking officer of the alien forces. His loyalty had to be to them. She couldn't shake the memory of his cold, distant demeanor from before. Why would he suddenly care about her or her people? "I don't want to be part of your war, Ragnor," she said, her voice hardening as she spoke. "I never asked for this. I never asked for any of it." Ragnor nodded slowly, a brief flash of understanding crossing his face. "I know, and you shouldn't have had to." He seemed to hesitate for a moment before continuing, his gaze dropping to the floor. "But what if I told you there were factions within my own people who don't agree with this invasion? What if I told you that there's a chance to end this war without the bloodshed?" Alara blinked, disbelief spreading across her features. "You expect me to believe that? That there are other aliens who are against the invasion? That after everything you've done, there's some kind of peaceful resolution waiting for us?" "Not all of us want war," Ragnor said firmly, his voice soft but resolute. "Not everyone in my army believes Earth should be conquered. Some of us see the destruction it's causing, and I think we can stop it." Alara stared at him, the weight of his words settling into her chest like a heavy stone. She wanted to shout at him, to demand that he take responsibility for everything that had been done. But something in his voice, something she couldn't explain, kept her from lashing out. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm saying that there's a way to stop this," Ragnor said, stepping forward again, his eyes intent on hers. But it will take both of us. We have to work together. Alara felt a surge of disbelief, followed by an overwhelming sense of dread. Work together? She repeated, as if the words themselves didn't belong in the same sentence. Are you serious? You're one of the people who's been tearing my world apart. You're the reason people I love are dead. And now you want to work together. She stood up quickly, her fists clenching by her sides. What do you want from me, Ragnor? Do you want me to trust you? After everything? You think I'll just forget that you're the enemy? I don't expect you to forgive me, Ragnor replied, his voice calm but resolute. I don't expect you to trust me, but I'm asking you to consider the possibility that not everything is as it seems. You've been fighting the alien forces for so long, but you've been fighting against the wrong enemy. The true enemy isn't the people who are just following orders. The true enemy is the system that controls us all. And I want to bring it down. But I need you. I need your help. Alara's heart raced. She wanted to yell at him, to tell him that he didn't get to decide the terms of this fight. But his words struck her deeper than she cared to admit. She thought of the resistance fighters she had lost, of the countless battles they had fought only to be pushed further back into the shadows. What if Ragnor was right? What if they had been fighting the wrong enemy all along? She could feel the conflict raging inside her. Part of her still wanted to lash out, to hate him with every ounce of her being. But another part of her, a small part, was listening to the possibility in his words. She had spent so long fighting against something she couldn't control, fighting against an enemy she thought was faceless and heartless. But what if there was more to the story? What if this was the chance to end the war? I don't know if I can trust you, Alara said finally, her voice quieter now, though still filled with hesitation. But I'll listen. I'll hear you out. But you need to understand this doesn't change who you are or what you've done. And I'm not forgiving you. Ragnor nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with something that almost looked like gratitude. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to show you that not all of us are the enemy. For the first time since their meeting, Alara felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Possibility. A sliver of hope. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough to erase the years of war, the bloodshed, the pain. But it was something. And in a world that had so little of it left, that something was worth considering. I'm listening, she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. But we'll do this my way. Understand? Ragnar's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. I wouldn't expect anything less. Days blurred into weeks as Alara and Ragnor continued their unlikely alliance. The tension between them never fully dissipated, but it became something they learned to manage. Each day, they worked together in silence, a silent understanding forming between them. They shared no grand declarations, no promises of friendship, but there was a mutual respect, a recognition that they were both trapped in something bigger than either of them. Ragnor kept his word. He showed her the fractures in the alien hierarchy, the factions within his own people that had begun to question the war. There were whispers of dissent among the alien ranks, secret meetings where officers like Ragnor argued that the conquest of Earth was not just immoral but unsustainable. He was a part of a group, a growing faction within the alien forces that wanted to end the war, to find another way. He was risking his life by even talking to her, by showing her these secrets. Alara's distrust slowly began to shift, though it never fully disappeared. She couldn't ignore the past, couldn't pretend that her people's suffering had been anything but brutal, but she saw the truth in Ragnar's eyes when he spoke of wanting to stop the violence. He wasn't asking for her forgiveness. He was asking for her help to do something no one thought possible, to end the war without more bloodshed. It wasn't easy. Every day they faced new challenges, new obstacles. The alien forces were vast, their grip on Earth still strong, and the resistance was fractured. The humans who had once fought so bravely were scattered, demoralized, uncertain of how to trust Ragnor or his faction. Every meeting, every conversation with resistance leaders was fraught with suspicion. But over time, through careful planning and the quiet persistence of Ragnar's group, the momentum began to build. Alara found herself in the center of a movement she hadn't expected to lead. The first successful operation, An underground raid on an alien supply line was a small victory, but it was enough to stir hope among the humans. Ragnar's faction had provided them with intelligence, and Alara's fighters had executed the mission with precision. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was the spark that had been missing for so long. In the days that followed, the resistance grew bolder, more organized. And with each small victory, Alara's belief in the possibility of a future began to shift. She still couldn't fully trust Ragnor, still couldn't ignore the blood on his hands, but the truth was becoming clear. He was no longer the enemy she had once seen him as. He was just a man, caught in the gears of a machine far too powerful for either of them to fight alone. One evening, after a particularly grueling strategy meeting, Alara found herself standing on the balcony of the makeshift headquarters they had set up in an abandoned city. The sky was a dark purple, the stars barely visible through the smog that still lingered in the atmosphere. Earth had changed. It wasn't the vibrant, thriving planet it once had been, but it was still theirs, still worth fighting for. Ragnor appeared beside her, as he always did now. He had become a constant presence in her life, though neither of them spoke much about the change. There was no need. Their shared work, their shared purpose, had forged an unspoken bond between them. "You've done more than anyone expected," Ragnor said quietly, his voice rough from the weight of the work they'd been doing. "Your people, they believe in you." Alara didn't look at him, but she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "They believe in a cause," she replied softly. "I'm just a part of it." He didn't argue. Instead, he leaned against the balcony railing, staring out at the fractured landscape of Earth. "I thought it would be impossible," he admitted, "that we couldn't stop this war, that your people would never accept anything less than revenge. But you've shown me there's another way." Alara turned to face him, her eyes scanning his features, the quiet strength in him she had come to recognize. "You've changed," she said, her voice softer now than it had ever been with him. "I don't know when it happened, but you've changed." Ragnar's lips twitched, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose I have. I'm not the same man who stood at your execution, watching you die. And you're not the same person who wanted nothing more than to see me fall." Alara couldn't deny it. She had wanted him dead. She had wanted to see him suffer for everything his kind had done to her world, to her people. But that was before she saw the cracks in the armor, before she understood the weight of the choices he had made. "I still don't know if I can forgive you," she said, the words coming out more gently than she intended. "But I can see that you're fighting for something more than just a victory. You're fighting for peace. And that matters." Ragnor met her gaze then. His expression softened in a way she hadn't thought possible. "Maybe forgiveness isn't something I deserve, but I will fight for this peace. For you. For all of you." There was a long silence between them, filled with the weight of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost. The world around them had been shattered, torn apart by war and destruction. But in that silence, in the quiet between them, there was something else. Something fragile but real. Alara exhaled slowly, her eyes still on him, and for the first time, she saw the man. Not the alien, not the enemy, but the person standing in front of her. He was as broken as she was, as flawed as anyone else. But there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a spark that had started to grow. It was the same spark she had once felt for her people, the belief that they could rise above the destruction, that they could rebuild. "I still don't know how this ends," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But maybe we can build something new. Together." Ragnor nodded, his hand reaching out, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. He didn't need to. His presence beside her was enough, a promise that, for the first time, they weren't fighting alone. And as the stars began to break through the thick clouds, Alara felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. It wasn't a bright, blinding hope. It wasn't a promise that everything would be fixed overnight. But it was enough. Together they would fight. Together they would rebuild. And perhaps in the end that would be enough to save them all.